All right, good evening. Can you all hear me? How's that? Is that better? I actually don't know what I'm going to talk about. I know when we first spoke, we were speaking a little bit on the wholesaling bill that's now law, so I thought what I would do is just kind of open it up to the floor here and just by a show of hands. How many of you do wholesaling? A couple of you. How many of you are landlords, own rental property? Okay. How many of you are in property management? Third-party management, not your own stuff. Okay, what about flippers? I heard somebody say flippers. Okay. How many of you are real estate agents and you don't own anything or manage anything? You're just here to network and try to find clients. No one wants to admit that? All right. So I do want to talk about a couple of things. I think since the vast majority of you are landlords, there's a lot of things coming down the pike that we have to be aware of. The first thing we need to talk about, he and I talked about wholesaling. I do want to talk a little bit about that before we get into the other stuff. The first thing is, with the wholesaling, is the legislature passed LB 892 back in the spring. It went into effect in July. That it doesn't outlaw wholesaling, and I want to explain what wholesaling is. Wholesaling is nothing more than an assignment transaction. So I go out and I find a buyer or a seller that wants to sell their home. I enter into a purchase contract with that seller. I have what's called equitable title or equitable interest in the property that is valuable, and it's a negotiable instrument, and then I turn around and try to find somebody like you to buy it. I have a contract with the owner of the property to buy it for $100,000. I turn around and then try to find somebody to buy it for, let's say, $150,000, and I make a $50,000 profit. Now, there's been a lot of pushback across the country with this because it's viewed as being predatory. And there are some real truth to that, and I've seen a lot of it, and I'm going to talk about the statistics that I'm aware of right now here in the Nebraska, Omaha, Lincoln area. But wholesaling also, to a certain extent, does fulfill a certain requirement. So, for example, I got involved with this as the director of Randall School. By the way, my last name is Vojchehoske. That's okay. I wear a couple of hats. I'm the executive vice president of Nebraska Realty at the corporate office in Omaha. I also run Randall School of Real Estate. And there was a time in my career when I had over 100 single-family homes. I have paired off most of them. I still am very involved in property management and other things. We do own a property management company here in Lincoln that I oversee from the 50,000-foot view. So I'm very in tune with what's going on. And as the director of Randall School, one of the things I started noticing about a year ago is I was getting calls from everybody about this thing called wholesaling. From owners, from wholesalers, from the people that were buying the equitable interest. So I started keeping the wholesaling packets. And that's when the investor enters into a contract with the owner, and then somebody in that chain there goes, well, I need some help, I don't understand something. And I would say, well, send me what you got. So I started keeping the packets. As of this year, January 5th, to this year, I've collected 104 wholesaling transaction packets. And here is what we have found, or at least what I have found, and what is so predatory about it. Of the 104 wholesaling packets that I have, 77 of those misled directly the owner of the property as to the value. So, and it was in writing. So they would say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, your property is worth it's probably worth about $100,000. I'll give you 105 because I'm a nice guy, and then immediately turn around and put it up for sale for $225,000. I seen one where they entered into a contract. They told them through email, that their property was worth $125,000, and it was really worth $295,000. That would have been an easy sell at that point. And you go, well, Paul, how can everybody knows the value of the property, and they don't. They have no idea. And that's the predatory side of it. So there is an intent to mislead. Of the 104 wholesaling transactions, 67 of them also, in addition to misleading on the value, they inferred that they were going to do some kind of repair. Like, hey, I need to do $40,000 in repair, so they reduce the price even further, and then they end up doing 0 repairs. Okay? They put it in writing. 27 of the 104 transactions, the contract wasn't even enforceable. It didn't have addresses, legal descriptions, no closing date, no names of parties, no purchase price. So there wasn't even a contract that was in place. 16 out of the 104, there was a promise to close, even if they couldn't find a wholesaler to buy it, and they didn't do it 12 of those times. 9 had required disclosure issues. 31, check this out, this is probably the most predatory. 31 of the 104 had the seller or the owner sign a general power of attorney. If you know anything about a general power of attorney, that means that wholesaler could have went right down to the bank and withdrew every bit of money out of their bank account, bought houses in their name, bought cars, everything. And in 2 of those cases, the wholesaler actually extended the purchase contract on behalf of that owner via the general power of attorney. So there's a lot of things and a lot of reasons why the legislature stepped in on this, and I don't think it was a bad thing. I think the way that they drafted the bill was horrible. That is now law. It's really complicated, but there was a need. The other interesting thing, though, is about 1/3 of the 104 people that I talked to, they actually were okay with it. I don't know which is worse, the wholesaler or that was trying to screw the person, or actually the owner knowing that they were. A lot of comments like, yeah, I went through a divorce, I have a year to sell it or refinance it, and that cheating son of a bitch isn't going to get anything, and you make me, just break me even and you can have it. Screw him or her. Heard that a lot. So it's an interesting dichotomy that's happening with the wholesale. Since only a couple of you, and listen, I'm not dogging on wholesalers here, I'm not. I think both sides are legitimate to a certain extent, but we always seem to deal in the extremes with things. But since only a couple of you raised your hand on wholesaling, I think I'm going to go in a different direction. How long do I have actually to speak? Okay, and then we can open it up for Q&A. I think the biggest thing I want to talk about, because there are a lot of regulations that are going to be coming down the pike. You have no idea what, especially after the election, and I don't mean to get political here, but the more liberal side of the political wings have gotten real emboldened by what happened on Tuesday, and we're going to see a whole lot more of legislation come. And I think we can probably assume that we're going to have proposed legislation for a new fair housing protected class, the protecting of the source of income, which basically is going to require that landlords and managers and owners accept Section 8 and other subsidized housing vouchers. Now, whether it makes it all the way through is a different story, but I think it's going to be proposed. Another one that's going to be proposed is for-cause withholding of security deposit. They tried to do that this last year, and it actually only, it would have made it to there were two votes short of making it to the governor's desk. Now, he would have probably vetoed it, but, you know, every step that you get closer, the worse it is. That was simply where you would have to go, if you were holding $1,000 in the security deposit, you would have to go before a judge and convince a judge that you need to deduct $250 because they didn't clean the carpets. You would not have the autonomy to do it automatically, and then the tenant can take you to court. You would have to go to court to be able to keep any of the security deposit. Now, how many of you are going to go to court to try to keep some of the security deposit? Anybody? You're not. We'll see what happens. I think that might get reintroduced. Probably the biggest threat from a risk management point of view is it's called the Healthy Kids Act, ACT. Many other states have it. Iowa has it. It decimated a large portion of an entire generation of landlords when it passed. And it's always sponsored by Justin Wayne and Tony Vargas. They're 2 senators out of Omaha. And it's regarding lead-based paint. So for those of you that invest in pre-78 rental properties, this is where it's going to get interesting. So if the bill ever passes, and every year it gets a little bit closer, it would require all kindergartners to, at their kindergarten physical, be tested for lead. if they test high for lead levels, that information goes to the county health department. And where do you think the first place that they go to look? The house that they're living in. It is deemed basically you're guilty until proven. The RRP certification. All right, how's that? All right, so it says that you have to have the certification, EPA RRP certification. It's been around since 2010. Almost nobody has it. And I'll explain why that's important that you start looking into this in a minute. Not only either that, you have to have it or you have to use RRP certified contractors. And there's not a whole lot of RRP certified contractors. There was when the law first came out, and then the EPA did a horrible job of enforcing it. So people were like, well, they're not enforcing it, so I'm not going to do it. It's a one-day class. It costs about $300 to get the training, and then it's another $300 to pay the EPA for a 5-year certification. You get an actual federal identification contractor's number, along with a plastic ID with your photo. You have to have it at all times on you when you're conducting work or you're overseeing work. There are a bunch of regulations, but here's what it requires you to do. If you disturb more than a 6 square foot area of the property, that's like a for sale sign, size of for sale sign, it must be done in safe work practices, which means hanging all the plastic, wearing the level 1 white suit, having plastic gloves, having the HEPA filters, clean up, and all of that. If you don't do that and you can't provide that documentation to the health department, you're toast. It's a vicarious liability. You're done. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So a friend of mine in Omaha has about 300 single-family homes. So one of his tenants, just one, has 2 kids. They found out that both the kids were autistic. So the doctor recommended that they get tested for lead. Both kids tested high for lead. Health department came in and found out that he was doing none of his work using RRP certified contractors. So basically the tenant sued, and his attorney is trying to negotiate a $1.25 million per child settlement. Otherwise, it's going to be probably $2 million if it goes to court, plus attorney's fees because it is in federal court. There is no defense to it. There's no, I don't have the money, I couldn't do it, the margins aren't there. You either comply or you don't. The first question in the deposition was, did you do the work in accordance with the EPA's RRP rules? And he goes, I don't even know what that is. Done. Right there, his attorney made up his mind that they need to settle. So for those of you, and the reason I bring this up is there's a lot of nonprofits in Lincoln and Omaha that when they get a phone call from a tenant, they are informing the tenants of these type of things. And that's why it's so important that, like it or not, you have to comply. And so that's probably the biggest risk that you have to your business from a liability perspective, is complying with RRP. The other thing to remember with this is under the Comprehensive Environmental Regulation and Liability Act, they call it CERCLA, or the Superfund law. It's a federal law. It allows state and federal judges to dissolve your LLCs, your trusts, your corporations, and all of that. So a tenant, in this case, could sue for environmental issues and get access to your personal assets. Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. All of those would apply. It, you would have to comply. We do onboarding all the time where we're repainting and scraping. If you're replacing windows, there are certain areas of the house that it's automatic. Even if you test it and it tests negative, you still have to do it. That's windows, doors, porches, siding. Siding if the house is built prior to 1958. And you learn all of that at the class, but there is no way around it. I will tell you that at the height of my single family rental empire, I had 101, and every one of them were pre-78. I now own 0. I started liquidating all my pre-78. There's nothing in real estate that scares me, and I mean nothing. If a tenant is in my house and they die because there's a fire, that's tragic, but I have enough insurance. I have LLCs to protect me. There's nothing that protects you from lead, nothing. And I am not making a mountain out of a molehill here. That's why, you can easily comply by doing the things you don't want to do, like using RRP certified contractors or becoming one. If you guys are interested, the name, and I have no affiliation, and I'm plugging them because they're about the only provider for training. It's called ZACK Academy, Z-A-C-K, ZACK Academy, and that's where you can they have road shows. They were just in Lincoln not too long ago, but they come through regularly so you can get that certification. You had a question in the back? This is current. It actually, the regulation went into effect in 2010. The one thing that they did do is they reinterpreted some of the language. Initially, flippers did not have to comply, but now flippers do. In fact, the Real Estate Commission, the next time that they update the seller property condition disclosure statement, that's a material condition statement that the owner has to make prior to sale. When they do their next update, you're going to have to make an affirmation of whether or not the work on the property was done, if it was an investment property or a flipper, in accordance with RRP rules and what was the RRP contractor's actual contract number. That's going to be required. So that's also going to be another issue for flippers as they move forward. I would suspect in late 2023 is when they're going to do the revision on that. Yes? They can, yes. He asked, just to kind of paraphrase the answer to his question is, it really doesn't matter if it's the owner-occupying person selling it or if you're an investor like a landlord or if you're a flipper. However, all the data shows that the main targets of lawsuits and EPA enforcement is for landlords, managers, and flippers. Owner-occupant are rarely held accountable for anything. So it is a double standard, but that's the way it is.
The question about the lead, like say we repaint everything with latex, what if there's like a lead water pipe? That's why it gets tested high.
Right. You can. There is, but here's the thing, and you're right. I'll give you another example. I had another, actually, when I was the president of the Omaha Landlords Association, he was a member of ours. And they came in, and the EPA really they wrote him up and everything, all kinds of notice of violations. And what happened is they found out that the lead came from candy from Mexico. But the problem is, they said, your maintenance, are you RRP certified? And he wasn't. And they went ahead and moved forward with the other side of it. It's $46,000 per day that you're not in compliance. The other thing is if the tenant files suit, they can get half of that. So there's an incentive. I simply bring that up. This could go on for hours, this particular topic. I do have a YouTube channel called Nebraska Landlord, and I do have a video on there that outlines the requirements and everything. But I just want to make you aware because we're going to see a lot of movement this next legislative cycle at the state level on lead. And that's going to impact everybody, including you flippers, right? The other part of that is Omaha and Lincoln are also going to start getting into the lead compliance game. We are starting to see it. We have a registration and inspection ordinance in Omaha. And they are, even though it's not part of the code, they are enforcing it. They're asking during the inspections for your maintenance record, and they're wanting to know whether, the document, your contractor number, who did you use for contractors? Otherwise, they are failing the inspection. And once Omaha does it, then Lincoln's going to start doing it, and vice versa, because they do talk to one another regularly. So I wanted to make that you guys aware of it, because that's going to be a potential pitfall coming up. The other thing that I do think that's going to be proposed, but I don't think it's going to pass yet, there's not enough votes, is there is a big thing going on nationally about landlords being very racist by requiring an application, by requiring a credit check, a criminal background check. And because they view housing as a human right, they consider those processes, which are legal now, as very discriminatory. And across the United States, we're seeing a movement, and a lot of jurisdictions are passing laws where they consider them protected. It's called stated income applications. We had stated income and financing back in the early 2000s, and that caused a lot of the mortgage meltdown. But basically, right now in San Francisco, Alameda, and many counties in California, New York, Detroit, Illinois, they simply have to put an amount down on the application, or they make it illegal for you to even ask how much a tenant or an applicant makes. It's stated income. You cannot verify their income. That is not the law now. It will be proposed. I don't think it's going to be passed at the state level. However, I would suspect at some point Lincoln and Omaha will put it into their city ordinance. Lincoln gets very aggressive with these things, and Omaha is not much better. We'll see what happens with that, but I think these are all the different things. Here's my advice to you is, especially you people that buy a property and hold it as rentals, there's only so much margin, right? We have taxes you got to pay, expenses. There's a certain amount of rent that you collect. Rents are very capped. There's only so high that you can go. You have to be able to look at the other parts of the country, because what happens in California and New York end up coming to Nebraska eventually, and you have to anticipate that when you're modeling your profit structures and your cash flow and your revenue streams. And you have to account for that, because what will happen is if you don't, you'll be fine for 3 years, then all of a sudden something happens, and then you find yourself in a negative cash flow situation. Another big one that a lot of the cities are passing, in fact, I talked to the chief inspector of Omaha about a year ago, and there was some proposals maybe happening. We'll see what happens in Omaha, but business licensing to become a landlord. And part of the business licensing, they have to determine whether or not you're fiscally responsible enough to be a landlord. Now, they can't say, so for example, you will have to turn your books over to an auditor so they can verify that you have enough cash flow, and they do it in the name of maintaining suitable housing stock. Because one thing that is true, that owners that milk properties damage the housing stock of a community, which that's how we get blighted neighborhoods and stuff like that. That is absolutely factual. And one of the things that they can track that back to factually is the fact where owners will buy a property, equity will build up over 5 years, they take money out, and then the equity builds up, they take more money out, and they're always very razor thin on the cash flow. That always calculates to poor maintenance. And that is absolutely a fact. It's been documented. Cities are fighting back against it, going, if you don't have enough cash flow, then we're not going to give you a business license. And you go, well, hey, wait a minute, I already own this property. What the hell am I supposed to do? It's vacant. And they'll say, that's not our problem. No business license, no tenants. The National Tenant Institute is a national nonprofit that push a lot of these legislative initiatives at the state and local level across the United States, and they've been very successful the last 2 or 3 years coming into COVID and out of COVID, getting some of these passed. We're going to start seeing those things eventually here. I don't know when, but I do think at least the proposals are going to start happening. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that most of the black neighborhoods were
That is true. Not most of them. I will tell you so MIT did a series of housing blighted area studies, and what they found for the most part is the private sector did it to themselves. Now, regulation put a lot into it, but what they found, the most blighted buildings in a neighborhood, they found that the owners milked the property. And meaning they took all the money and did nothing for maintenance, and many times they would suck out the equity at 90, 100, 125%, and then the cash flow margins become very problematic, and then maintenance is always the first thing that suffers. However, Omaha Housing Authority is the worst landlord on the planet. Sorry for you Lincoln Housing Authority folks, but Omaha OHA is horrible. And that's a government, right? And Jackson Tower is the neighbors are getting bed bugs because of their building at Jackson Tower in Omaha. It's horrible. So it's a combination. However, the problem is the cities will never take responsibilities, and they'll always blame the private sector, right? Even though it's really both. So how do we get around all of these things? Oh, one other thing before I move on to the next topic, and that is expect rent controls. There's a big push. I think there's a good chance that Lincoln and Omaha will pass some form of rent control in the next year or two. That's just my opinion. I don't think it's going to make it to the state level. Rent control can come in many different forms and fashions. I will tell you, for example, in California, rent control, LA County, for example, once you rent an apartment or a house to that tenant, whatever that rent is will be the rent as long as they live there, period. You'll have tenants that live in the same rental property 30 years, and they started out paying $125 30 years ago every month. That's their rent today. Other rent control forms, like in New York City, it's a board that meets, and then they determine what a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, how much you can charge. We're going to see that. The problem that we have as an industry, and it irritates me, is we're not very politically active, right? We'll show up at a city council meeting, and then we always say this: well, if you pass this, who are we going to pass the cost on to? What do we always say? If you pass this, I'm just going to pass the cost on to who? The tenant. That's the wrong answer. And the reason is, this is like debate class in high school and college, where you anticipate what your opponent's going to say to the argument. The people that are pushing rent control want you to say that, because then they're going to say, listen, we need to have X, Y, and Z regulation, and oh, by the way, we need rent control because by the landlord's own admission, they're going to raise the rent, so we need to protect these tenants. Right? So we need to be organized, a little more professional about things, and that's a whole different sidebar. It used to irritate me when I was the president of the Omaha Landlords Association, where we'd show up at the city council meetings, and then people would be in their overalls and drywall dust and mud on their shoes, and, well, I'm a working guy, and they need to see who I am, and that's the wrong, anyways, whole different story. So there are some things, and here's where I really want to get to. There are some things now that you guys can do to start preparing for all of this stuff, because it's going to happen in some form or fashion. It's just a matter of what sneaks through and at what level. What we're seeing in the industry, and we have for several years now, to overcome all of this, because let me back up. What do you think the profit margin is in property management in the landlord business, cash flow-wise? Anybody want to take a stab at the number? There is a number, an objective number, the profit margin. What do you think? Close. 6%. Somebody should buy him a drink just for that. I'll get people, oh no, it's 25, 30%. No, it's about 6%. That is the profit margin. After you pay expenses and all of that, that's how much we have left over on average. It's about 3.5% with rent control, but there are some things that we can do to overcome it. The entire industry in the property management side is going to fee-based property management, fee-based landlording, and it is absolutely lucrative, and it's all pure profit. So let me give you an example, and this works not only for property managers, but also landlords. Any third-party managers in here? A couple of you? The rules are a little bit different for you guys in that you have to make sure in your management agreement with the owner that these are listed and who gets what, okay? When you go buy a car, there is a junk fee that's included in the purchase price. Anybody know what that's called? Dock prep fee. Anybody know how much it is right now? How much is it? Right, I mean just a range. $199 to $599. My wife bought a car last year and it was $640. So it's all over the place. The point is, we can do the same thing. We've been doing it on the sales side for a long time. We call it broker administrative commission, where the buyer and seller, in addition to any commissions, both the buyer and seller pay anywhere from $200 to $350 is kind of the going rate here in Lincoln, Omaha. You should be doing the same thing. I do a lot of consulting with property management companies in Omaha, and we're even on C-class properties. Where's my C-class owner? He has in the back there. Think about this. What are you eating? So we were talking about his 15 unit that he owns, and anyways, it works. I will tell you that the going rate right now in Omaha and Lincoln is about $150 at lease signing. Some of the B properties, which is $1,000 to $2,000 in Omaha per month in rent, they're getting upwards of $400. And the A property, I mean, some of them are $1,000. But generally speaking, anywhere between $150 and $300. Call it a dock prep fee. If you're a third-party manager, it's got to be called a broker administrative commission. Has to be under law. But the rest, throw it in there. Throw it into your lease. Tenants rarely say anything about it. If you have 10 units, and 5 of those units come due or vacant, you're going to onboard a new tenant every year, and you're charging $200. That's $1,000 of pure profit that you wouldn't have had that you now have. And the tenants will pay it. I get this excuse all the time. Oh my gosh, my tenants aren't going to pay that. You don't understand my properties. You don't understand that they all pay it. Every level across the board. Here in Lincoln, Performance Property Management is part of our fold. They're charging it. And the tenants aren't resisting. And if your tenant is willing to pay $150 and they don't squabble about it, then the next lease that you do with your next proposed or prospective tenant, try $175. Play with it until you start getting resistance. You'll be surprised at the numbers. Make sure it's in your lease, though. Number 2, yes? Okay, you can do both. I would say that once you get a tenant, if you like them, we want to keep them, and it does deter them from renewing the lease. That's what all the data shows, but it does not deter them from the initial lease signing. So you can, if you want to. I would probably keep it just to the initial lease signing. And if you're a third-party manager, so you have to determine or work this out with your manager or your owner, how much of that you get to keep. Okay? Industry standard, it's about 50-50. But if you're a straight-up landlord, you're not under management. That's pure profit. The other thing, raise a hand here. Be honest. How many of you have a grace period in your lease? Really high. I want to see really high. Okay. So here's another thing. Everything in our business is for profit, period. Everything has a revenue stream attached to it. Another one is a grace period. Why are you giving away free days? Rent is due on the 1st, period. Late on the 2nd, you're going to get served the notice. However, if you want a 3-day grace period, it's $25 a month. If you want a 5-day, it's $75 a month. If you want a 7-day, it's $150 a month. It should not be free. You'll get a few tenants that'll balk at that one, unlike unlike we see with the dock prep fee, but not many. And they don't get to choose. They're either going to do it all or none, right? So when you do your lease, they're going to do it for the whole 12 months, their election, whatever grace period that they want. The reason is now that we've gone to a 7-day notice for non-payment of rent, if you're giving away 5 days, depending on the county you're in, you may push in your eviction off into the next month. In Douglas County, it's a big deal. We're in Omaha, I don't know where Lincoln's at on time frames, but still, it's a privilege. It's not a right. Yeah, so think of that. As your leases are coming due, start thinking about maybe charging a grace period. Another one that really works, and I'm always amazed, and I'm not going to ask this question because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but why aren't you charging an application fee? When I do road shows around the state, when I teach the landlord-tenant class, I will actually have them do a silent survey where yes or no on a piece of paper. Do you charge an application fee? And it runs about 60% no. Charge an application fee. Right now, the going rate is $35 to $50 per applicant. If there's 3 of them applying, then all 3 of them have to fill it out. Make money off it. One thing I would caution you is you cannot call it it has to be called an application fee, because under the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, if you call it a background check fee, you can only collect the exact amount that the company charges you for that background check, or if it's, a credit report, you can only charge the exact amount. Application fee. Yes? You are. Yep. And usually you have, $10 or $15 left over, especially if you use like a company like Tenant Data, where you get you get a lot of the information, and for, I think it's $29. Everything should have a revenue stream attached to it. Point is, if you're not doing the application fee, that's costing you money because you're having to pay for it. Nothing is free. The other thing is, by doing the application fee, it's going to deter a lot of bad credit prospective tenants. They know they got to pay. They're not going to do it if they have really bad credit. Make sure, though, whatever it is, you're charging the same. You cannot say, well, you're going to be $50. Ooh, you don't speak English, you're from Mexico, that's going to be $75. That's going to be a really quick fair housing complaint filed against you. Okay? Yes?
Back on the grace period, the late fee versus when you serve notice is 2 different things, right? So when you were talking about giving them a grace period if they pay X per month,
Right.
are you talking about simply delaying or like waiving the late fee for the first
No.
days when you still serve the notice on the second, or you were also talking about like, hey, we won't actually serve you notice until the 4th?
Right, so what I'm talking about is the law says under the landlord-tenant statute, rent is due on the 1st unless you agree to an alternative date. It's very common for the 5th of the month. It's due on the 1st. It's not late until the 5th, okay? And then that means you're not allowed to send them a 7-day notice of non-payment of rent until the 6th of the month, because it's not late until the 6th, right? It's due on the 1st, but late on the 5th. That's the grace period. What I would tell you is if you're going to go to the 5th, then they're going to pay, you want the 5th? Okay, great. That means it's due and it's late both. The 5th is it. You're going to pay X amount of dollars for that. On the 6th, if you don't pay, then you're going to get your 7-day notice plus a $75 late fee.
I think a fair amount of people do, it's due on the 1st, late on the 2nd, but late fees are waived if you pay before the 5th or something.
Yeah, never waive your late fee, ever. It's a behavior modification tool. That's what it is. Unless, let's back up here. So I was doing some consulting at in a apartment community in Oklahoma City, 400 units. Who's got a calculator on their phone that can help me out? Anybody want to volunteer? All right, 400 units. 73% of their units paid, but paid late. So 73% of 400 is how many units? 292 units per month. Now, 1% of those ended up going to eviction. That is very nominal. That means everybody was pretty much just paying late. And we'll get into the reason why in a minute. So 292 units. Their late fee, this was only a couple years ago, their late fee was $22 a month. 292 times 22 equals $64.24 a month. $6,400 a month profit. Times that by 12. $77,000 of additional income. Now think about this. 292 units out of 400 paid late, but less than 1% ever went to eviction. That is a revenue stream. So then we decided to say, what's the going rate, what's the industry standard in Oklahoma City for late fees? It was $75. 292 times 75, what do you get? $22,000 a month additional money through the late fees. Now, I know that's a 400, and then you times that by 12, $260,000 of pure profit. Now, I get that most of you don't have 400 units, but it doesn't matter. It's all scale. If you have 10 units, number one, it's a behavior modification tool. We want our money, but if not, it's going to cost you. So don't waive it ever. That's my opinion. We raised it to $75. As the leases came due, there was absolutely no pushback. Actually, to go one step further, what we ended up doing, I was like, I want to know why they're doing this. And what we found out after we surveyed the tenant pool is most people get paid on Friday, right? Every 2 weeks. But if rent's due on Wednesday, when are they going to pay their rent? On Friday. And they're going to pay the late fee, and part of it was because it was it was $22, right? But think about this. So what we decided to do is for tenants that qualified, we put them on they paid the rent every 2 weeks. So instead of paying a monthly rent, now their rent's due every 2 weeks. That's 26 pay periods in a 12-month period versus 12. And we upped it. So now if your rent's $1,000 a month and you paid once a month, that's $12,000 gross that you're going to collect. But because there's 26 pay periods, essentially we're going to raise rent $100 every pay period. So then do the math. How much every year? $2,600, right? If I did the math right. So be creative. We were very creative. You guys are Lincoln. The other thing that we have in Sarpy County where the air base is, military gets paid the 1st and the 15th of every month. And so they usually pay on the 1st of the month. They'll pay that $1,000 a month rent. But if you can split it up, so what a lot of the landlords we do in Sarpy County is first half is due on the 1st of the month, the second half is due on the 15th. But instead of paying $500 and $500, they're paying $600 and $600. That's a $200 per month premium. All pure profit for giving the tenant what they want anyways. So anytime, you got to start being creative. Fee-based property management is about being creative to enhance your profit margin.
Any comment on daily late fees?
That can be a problem with the judges. I know a lot of times people like to put so much per day or a certain percentage every day. The problem is if you go in front of a judge, every county in Nebraska, they usually kick it back. I rarely see a judge, even in A properties, where they allow more than about $75 in a late fee, sometimes $100. And what you run the risk of is if you do a per day and then it gets up into $300-400, then it gives the judge, if they're an activist judge, it gives them the ability to declare the entire lease unconscionable and void the entire lease. I've seen that happen numerous times. So be careful with how much. Right now in Nebraska, probably $75 is about the max I would charge. $50 to $75 depending on what the rent is, the monthly rent. But make sure that you're collecting them and enforcing it. Very important. Any questions thus far on anything? The fee-based stuff? Yes.
Not fee-based, like rent control, like how do you foresee Nebraska structuring?
I actually think that it's going to be a long time before we get it at the state level. It's going to be Lincoln and Omaha that does it. And I think what we're going to see more than likely is they're going to require you to accept Section 8 or subsidized housing vouchers, first of all. And then the second part of that is they'll probably do what most other jurisdictions that are in more conservative states is they're going to have just a scale that the county, somebody, a board or somebody declares that, hey, a 2-bedroom is going to be X amount, a 3-bedroom is going to be X amount, and then you're going to have the ability to raise rents. They'll cap the amount like 3% a year, 5% a year. That's going to be my guess. That's the most popular, and I think they could probably get it through the two city councils, Omaha and Lincoln. If they make it too restrictive, then they won't. But you know, everything is progressive. You got to start little, and then once you get it in place, then you expand on it. I think that's something in Lincoln. In fact, I've heard grumblings that's ultimately what Lincoln wants to do. So does Omaha. Just that's the way it's going to happen. Yeah. Yeah, they just tell you what you can charge. Yeah. Absolutely. Rent control he was talking about, the gentleman at the table that you're at, that is absolutely one of the reasons we see blighted neighborhoods. It's one of them. On the other hand, though, not every rent control is, like Section 8 right now is really lucrative. I understand why no one wants to take Section 8. It's not, actually who gets hurt the most with Section 8 is the tenants. They're the ones getting screwed. Because most landlords that don't want to take it don't take it because the process sucks. For those of you that know anything about Section 8, it's a great program. It's just the process sucks and the people that's involved. And who's the person that gets hurt? It's the tenant. But we're starting to see the Section 8 amounts really start to ramp up. It's a business decision whether you want to take it. I'd rather have that than be enforced, but of course they do that. Right. It's safe, it's secure. One of the biggest problems that we see in Section 8, to illustrate it, is you'll have a Section 8 landlord that's owned it for 20 years. Every year he gets his inspection, no issues. All of a sudden it sells, and the new landlord, everything's the same. All of a sudden, the inspection sheet is lit up with all kinds of issues, right? That's what we're talking about when we say the system sucks. So fee-based is where it is. Be creative. Another thing that we like to see sometimes, or we are seeing in the fee-based industry, is my favorite. I actually created it, and I've had several of my clients that I consult with. We implemented it, and that is a monthly environmental regulatory compliance fee. And this fee can be anywhere from $7 to $20. A recent landlord has been charging $25. Listen, we have a lot of things that we have to comply with. Everyone here really should be getting fair housing training every year. If you're not, you're naughty, spank yourself and get into the next fair housing class. Like it or not, we have to do it. If there's ever a fair housing complaint filed against you, the very first question they ask is, how much training have you had? And you want to be able to show that you've had training. That costs you money. Secondly is pre-78 homes. We have to keep these lead-based paint disclosures and all of this stuff. That is a cost. Charge an environmental compliance fee in addition to your monthly rent. That's what we do. And you start scaling that and comparing it. If you have 5, 7, 10 units, that all adds up. That is pure profit. Probably want to ixnay pure profit from the video if it goes to the public, because then it'll be used against you. But that's what it is. Just change it to pure cost. But yeah, think outside of the box and start loading your leases up with all kinds of stuff here. Yes, sir.
Do you or do you have to disclose any of that when you're advertising the property for rent and you say it's $1,600 a month? Do you have to mention all the other costs?
I would just as from a risk management point of view, I'd say your rent's $1,600, other fees may apply. No. Other fees may apply. What I would suggest is you take 2 or 3 of them and just start with the doc prep fee and then start implementing it, see how it goes, and then start adding maybe the grace period fee, see how it goes. If you guys aren't doing application fees, that's immediate, and you should do that right away, starting with your next applicant. Yes? Yes. Well, you just itemize it, yep. That's it, absolutely. One other, just a little word of caution, what we're seeing, we've always seen it, but it's becoming very popular in Omaha, is you need to make sure that you're collecting your first month's rent and your deposits that you're collecting in certified funds or cash, if you're okay with taking cash. Do not accept a personal check or a money order. What we're finding is professional tenants know the trick, and they are stopping payments. They're counterfeit. Did you know you can also put a stop on a money order? And we're seeing that, and then they sign the lease, and then you don't have any money because the check bounces, and then you're having to evict them, and you don't have any of their money. In fact, one of the nonprofits in Omaha is really pushing that, actually. They say that they're not, but they are. I've heard from several tenants that are friends of mine. I got a mole inside of it. I won't tell you which one, but I got a mole inside of the nonprofit. Which brings up probably the next Section 8. The one I do think is going to pass this year is, and this is going to be devastating. I'm glad I remembered this. So they tried it this past year at the legislature. It didn't pass. And that is that a tenant has a right to legal counsel during eviction. That means that the public defender's office is going to have to be the attorney for every eviction, which means you're going to have to pay a fee as a landlord to fund that. This past year, the fee was proposed at $50 per door per year. That was the fee that was going to be. It didn't pass, and here's why it didn't pass. And that is, there were a couple of holdout senators that said, you got to give me something that I can go back to the voters and defend my vote. Meaning they needed a study. So the dean of the Creighton Law School up in Omaha, they train all of their law students with landlord-tenant issues. And he absolutely believes in what he does. So he believes, he came out, and he spoke to the Rioma group here in Lincoln last year, and he stated that 96% of all leases in Nebraska are illegal. And it is because of how he interprets the statute. That's where he justified it. But anyways, he's paying for a study to be done that's going to indicate that 96% of all leases in Nebraska are illegal, and landlords are doing bad things, and tenants need this protection. So then they can go back to the legislature, and some of those holdouts, they have something to be able to defend their vote. I would probably suspect that that's going to pass this year. So that means your tenant is going, we always hope that if you have to do an eviction, the tenant doesn't show up. Well, they're going to show up now. They're going to have legal representation. So in states like Illinois and Minnesota that already have this, it takes, on average, 4 to 6 months to do an eviction, because then the attorney gets a continuance and does their stuff. Now, how much rent are they paying during that 4 to 6 months? 0. And how much are you going to get back from them? 0. So just keep that in mind. I think that there's a good chance that's going to pass. One last thing I would tell you. How many of you ever get anything from a tenant that's bailed on you? Maybe you turn it over to collections, right? Maybe. There is a little trick that you can do, but your lease has to be structured in a way that you can do this. By the way, I do have my lease is 32 pages. If you want a copy of it, I'll give it to you in Word format. Just drop me an email, paul@nebraskarealty.com. If you want a copy, I'll get it to you, paul@nebraskarealty.com. It's free of charge. What I have done is it says basically that if a tenant owes me any money when tenancy ends, it's considered liquidated damages, and that's very important. I had a tenant one time, he did $6,000 worth of damage. He bailed. So I forgave the debt. Now, when you forgive a debt, what does that create? A taxable transaction. That means it's like getting a $6,000 commission check where no taxes have been taken out. So I was able to send him a 1099 at the end of the year to the last known address, which is where? Where's the last known address? The property. I also send that $6,000 1099 to the IRS. About 3 years later, I get a call from him. He was a pastor, actually, and he was on a missions trip in South Africa. They found him in South Africa. And he's like, what is all this about? I'm going to sue you and all of that. Well, I said, I forgave the debt. It was $6,000. You don't owe me anything. But I got to pay the IRS. Well, I don't know what to tell you. The law says that if I forgive a debt, that's a taxable transaction. Now, if you forgive a debt, what does that mean? Don't double dip. Don't turn it over to collections. You forgive it, you forgive it. That's the right thing to do ethically and morally and legally. The issue is most CPAs will say you can't do that because the IRS won't let you do that for landlord-tenant debts. My contract reads it's not a landlord-tenant. It's a liquidated damage for a breach of contract. So then it becomes applicable. So make sure you let your CPAs know that. And if you're going to do that, you have to be very consistent. Either you're going to do it all or none, or you're going to do it above a certain price range, like $1,500 and above, or it has to be objective because otherwise you're going to get into fair housing issues. But think about that. You get zero, but there's a lot of solace knowing that the IRS is going to be your debt collector. Well, Uncle Sam anyway, so, right? Anybody have any questions? I've just like shotgunned everything. So, any questions on anything? And he goes, well, I'd like to have 90 days. And the judge said, go for it, 90 days. No, my only option is to appeal, which is going to take 6 months and $10,000. I ended up paying, I said, if you can be out and sign the keys out by Friday, I'll give you $1,000, and that's what I did. Absolutely, my attorney was objecting, and the judge said appeal. So, no, and it's going to get worse. Lancaster right now is probably the worst county in Nebraska for judicial activism. Yeah, I've heard that. But there's just more of them here in Lancaster, so. Any other questions on anything? Yes. So you can never undo what you've done. You were not in compliance at the time, but here's the thing the EPA, to their credit, they love. When somebody falls on the sword, and you can show them a line of demarcation or datum. So you can say, listen, I didn't even know what it was until this date. Then I went to the next available training that we had in Lincoln, and then I started doing X, Y, and Z, and they can see that. They love that. Now, will it protect you from the civil side if your tenant sues you? No. But from a regulatory point of view, it will really save your bacon. You can't undo what's already been done. Question? You said it's probably a good idea to do fair Yes. You know, you can get it, Larrabee School of Real Estate has it, Randall School of Real Estate. In fact, I do training all the time. Maybe what we can, November, or April is always Fair Housing Month. Come back and do it for everybody. You got to have it documented, because what happens is once they're in an investigation, it typically goes to the Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission. An investigator shows up, and the first thing they ask, or one of the first questions, is documentation of training. If you have no training, they assume that you hate fair housing, which is not good. The other thing is, if you can show, yeah, I go every year, and here's my certificates, then they go, well, maybe the tenant is lying. Like, I'll give you an example. I was on the board of directors of a property management company in Omaha, and at the time we had about 1,600 doors. And we had a downtown location that had an 8-foot, what do you call them, where you walk from the street into the door, an inset of 8 feet. She would sleep there during night. She was a homeless person. Every morning at 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. when we opened up, we would give her a cup of coffee and a donut, say, hey, come back after closing. And she did that for a couple of years. One day we didn't have donuts. She got pissed, went down to the Fair Housing Center and said that we were discriminating. She was a current tenant. Maintenance people were molesting her kids, our maintenance people. So they helped her file a complaint with the NEOC. We went through the whole thing, $25,000 in legal fees, 9 months. We won unanimously, but they knew within the first day that it was a bogus complaint. But one of the things that really helped is we require everybody in the entire company to go through annual fair housing training, even our maintenance people and contractors. Now, we had the leverage to do that with the contractor, but if Roto-Rooter shows up, what we find with landlords who get into trouble with fair housing, one of the major issues is the contractors that we hire get us into trouble. We are responsible for their actions. Roto-Rooter shows up, and during the course of unplugging the drain, they say something that's offensive. The tenant files a fair housing complaint. You get the complaint, not Roto-Rooter. You're responsible for theirs. So if you know, some of the larger companies we had the ability to leverage and say, if you want our business, we required our contractors to do it every year too. So please go to fair housing training. That's the business. And in Larrabee School here in Lincoln, I know the board of realtors have it all the time, and they allow people from non-realtors to take it. You got to pay a fee, but again, charge that environmental and regulatory compliance fee to help offset that cost. And you can do it online too. Fair housing training online, and Google will show you half a dozen different providers. Yes?
For more laws, rules, Rioma here in Lincoln is
Yeah.
a good organization. We got 2 board members here from Rioma. Steve and me, Bill, are all members of Rioma. You need to know more laws, and we need people to help fight city and government at the courthouse when our lobbyist goes to fight. Oh, Jonathan's also a board member.
Yeah. Yeah, if you own rental properties, if it's residential, I don't know if you guys do commercial, but you need to belong to organizations. Rioma's a good one. If you're in Omaha, Metro Omaha Property Owners Association, that's the trade industry or the trade association. Be a member.
You mentioned your rental lease is 37 pages.
32.
Is that just in length because of the clauses and things that you have to protect yourself and explaining the different fees, or what's the gist of that?
So, you know, that was my original lease in 1996 was like 3 pages, and every time I ended up going to court, I would lose or something would happen. Now I put it in there. And it just grew. And then I decided to make it like addendum based, because if I don't allow, let's say I don't allow pets, right? Then I don't want anything in my lease other than I don't allow pets to be in there. But if they have pets or I allow pets, then I want all the rules. So then I created an addendum. Now, some of the addendums you're going to remove because they're not going to be applicable, but the total package is 32. We're getting creative with things like, we're starting to see like first right of refusals for those of you that are in real estate. Oh, by the way, Broadmoor, they're a property management company in Omaha. They manage the Blatt, which is on 168th and Center. My son just rented an apartment. 44-page, legal size, triple net residential lease, apartment lease. Triple net. He pays flat rent. He pays his pro rata share of the dumpster fees, the trash. He pays a fee every month for common area expenses. He pays a fee for his portion of the property insurance and property taxes. And now you're starting to see Selden companies getting on board with it, so the apartment communities are starting to see triple net lease apartment leases. So why shouldn't we do that in a single family home or back there with the 15 units? Think about that. If your deal falls apart, man, then wait a year and just get all new tenants with all kinds of fees on it, so then it increases your cost or your income. Just saying.
As in, they can charge more if there's an unexpected expense that's in the triple net language, or insurance goes up a year.
Right. Well, it's really difficult the way the landlord-tenant law is structured to do it mid-lease, but they're paying it right at the beginning. So right now our current dumpster fees are, let's say, $1,000 a month. There are 10 units here. Everybody's got to pay $100. That's the theory of it. Now, if your dumpster fees go up 6 months into it, it's really hard to increase it. Then you wait till the renewal, and then you up it. But people are passing the cost on of everything to the tenant. And they're getting away with it. The tenants are paying it. So for those of you that have multi-units, even the smaller ones, think about that. You have common area cost. Throw on a $12 a month common area fee. Yes. Right. Well, I mean, if it's single family, the city pays for it, but if it's an apartment, they have to have dumpsters. Yeah, a lot of the states like that. You know, one other thing that's starting to catch on, and we don't know if it's going to be legal or not. Sorry, I don't mean to take up the time, but we're starting to see outstate where, I don't know how it is in Lincoln, does the utilities, is that attached as a lien to the property? So if your tenant doesn't pay the utilities, then it's a lien? Okay. What we're starting to see in those jurisdictions where landlords are charged not a security deposit, but a utility deposit. The landlord-tenant statute has not dealt with this at all. So people are saying, screw it, I'm taking a chance. So they're collecting a $250 utility deposit. Now, you can't make that part of the security deposit. It has to be separate. So if they leave and then all their utilities are paid up, they get 100% of that back. But that's what we're seeing in outstate Nebraska. Something to think about. Right now, it's perfectly legal. There's nothing in the landlord-tenant statute that says you can't do it, as long as you don't call it a security deposit. Call it a utility deposit.
So how does that work if you have to have their deposit back to them for damages or whatever by the end of 14 days? Let's say it's on a 2-month cycle.
You have to have their security deposit back. Nothing says, there's nothing in the statute that says utility deposit. Now again, there's no case law on this. Lawyers, the judges haven't, but this is what we're seeing. And I'm sure judges, some are going to say it's no good, some are going to say it's good, but I'm taking my chances. Because that's screwing people. A lot of landlords are getting screwed over that outstate. So, yes?
So I have a question on wholesale thing, just because I feel like it really helps people raise their hands, like, probably 15 or 20 of us have wholesale, maybe just don't want to put their
Okay. Ooh.
what has changed lately? Like, we all know about the law, but how is that being interpreted by the...
So Thursday, the Nebraska Real Estate Commission, they're going to vote on the final rules and regs. And there's a couple of things that you have to know. Number one is, remember, 892 did not outlaw. You can still do wholesale transactions. It's just you cannot market your equitable interest, which essentially puts you dead in the water. So you and I can go out and, like, I'm the wholesaler, you're the seller. We enter into a purchase contract. I have equitable interest. For me to market that equitable interest to anybody, I now have to use a licensed real estate agent or I have to be licensed myself. Marketing is very broadly defined under the statute. Even if you text somebody and say, a prior client of yours saying, hey, I got a new wholesaling transaction, are you interested? That's marketing. You would be in violation. So essentially, they've made it where you have to have a real estate agent sell your equitable interest. That's the first thing to remember. You don't have to do that to enter into that initial contract, but just to market your equitable interest. Now then there's a couple of other things that happens after that that you have to know. So we know we have to list it with a real estate agent. That real estate agent is going to make you sign a listing contract. Not with the seller or the owner of the property, but with you, the wholesaler. So that agent's going to represent you. You're going to be required, and this is what a lot of the wholesalers are forgetting to do, is him and I entered into this wholesaling transaction. You have to make sure that your seller property condition disclosure and your lead-based paint disclosure is done. Him and I are going to do that. I'm the buyer, the wholesaler, he's the owner. He's going to fill out the seller condition disclosure, the lead-based paint, I'm going to sign that. So when I sell my equitable interest to him, I have to take those disclosures that him and I already signed and give them to him because he has to sign as an additional purchaser. Okay? That's really important, especially with the lead-based paint, because under the Federal Code of Regulations, if he signs the assignment contract before he signs the lead-based paint disclosure, then all of the that assignment contract is voidable by him, all the way up to the point of closing. So you want to make sure that the disclosures are given before the contracts are signed. Another thing that's going to happen is if the new regulation is passed, there is an additional form that the assignee, the end buyer, and the owner is going to have to sign at the time the listing contract is signed with the wholesaler, okay? And I'm going to show it to you here. It's called the Assignable Contract Addendum. That's going to be absolutely required. So remember, I'm the wholesaler, he's the owner, he's the end buyer, what we call the assignee. He's going to be the real estate agent that's going to list my equitable interest for sale. When him and I sign that listing contract, this form, this assignable addendum has to be done. And that means the assignee, the wholesaler, and the original owner is going to have to sign that. Otherwise, he is subject, and the wholesaler, everybody's subject to enforcement by the state. Yeah. Well, when I'm sending over the contract and the assignment contract and all of that and the disclosures, that also has to be in that packet. Does that make sense? Yeah. Not at the same time. Not at the same time. Later. Right. So he puts it up for sale. Remember, I have the purchase contract in our little scenario here between the owner and myself. I have the purchase contract. We also did the seller disclosure and the lead-based paint. He puts it up for sale. He gives me this form. He says, hey, Paul, as your agent, we got to make sure this is filled out. The owner has signed it. He calls and says, hey, I want to I want to take that contract over. So then I'm going to give him a copy of the contract that we have, because remember, he is simply assuming the responsibilities. Then he's going to have to sign this new form plus the disclosures. That's the biggest change that we have seen. If they are approved, this is what's being proposed. They go before the Real Estate Commission on Thursday. Hang on one sec. Yes?
What if the owner won't sign it even though it's a legally assignable contract?
Sign what? This here? It's just like any other disclosure. That is, then what he's going to do as the real estate agent is make a notation on there that it was presented to the owner on this date and time and the owner refused to sign. Yeah, yeah, you can't force him to do it, but he as the agent has an obligation to present it. Okay, good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I have been told, for you real estate brokers that are out there, that all the because remember, essentially, they're all going to have to go through real estate companies, and every real estate company is audited by the commission once a year, that 100% of wholesaling files will be audited. That's what I've been told. We'll see. I had somebody, okay. By the Nebraska Real Estate Commission. What's that? If you double close, then it's just 2 closings. The issue that you're going to have, though, is at what point is the second purchase agreement drawn up? So him and I'm the wholesaler, he's the owner, we get a contract. All right? Now, if I start marketing my equitable interest now, then the law applies. If I wait to close on it, then I can do it, and it's not a big deal. But if I don't wait, if I start marketing before it closes, then the entire suite of regulations apply. So the double close really isn't going to be a loophole. That's right, because you're the owner. You can as long as your broker allows it and you follow the rules. Even if you are a licensed agent and you're representing yourself, all the same rules apply. Yes. Uh-huh.
If you're going to double close, you're not marketing your equitable.
Okay, it depends. That's equitable interest. That's equitable interest. So you wouldn't have to comply as, again, I'm the wholesaler, him and I enter into a contract, he's the owner, and then I close. Then I turn around and start marketing it immediately. I'm the true legal owner now, title holder, so none of this applies. But if we entered into this contract and I haven't closed yet, and now I'm starting to market my equitable interest, find somebody, then everything applies. That would be considered a wholesale transaction.
So it's because the exception only applies to someone who's the current owner?
Correct. Yep. There is no loophole around this. There isn't any. Yes, in the back.
You can market it to agents. Is that what the law is saying, or?
Whether it's marketed to agents or otherwise, if you have equitable interest.
You have equitable interest, and you send a text message to somebody else.
Yep.
Not an agent, that's considered marketing. But you
Yep.
can market it to agents.
No, you would still have to have it listed by a real estate company.
But how do you get it listed by a real estate company without telling us?
Because you're not marketing the equitable interest to the real estate agent. What you're saying is, hey, I need you to list this for me. And then he,
You can market that, you can list, can you say you're going to list it to a bunch of different agents?
You mean like market, like, hey, who wants to be my buyer's
No,
agent or
you
seller's
can't
agent?
call it marketing, you have to call it, you ask them to list.
So what you do is you have this contract and then you text, let's say 100 real estate agents saying, I have this contract, I'm looking for a listing agent. You would probably get away with that, but at some point, even if that agent is going to buy it, it has to be listed. You do not fall under the period. It has to be. There's no way around it. It can't be in the MLS right now. The MLS rules forbid it. I think that'll change once the final rules are adopted. I think it'll change, but as of right now, they were kind of saying, hey, before we make any decisions, let's wait and see what the final rule is. Yes? Once it's listed, it has to be listed before you can market it to anybody. And one other thing, one thing we do not know yet, part of the regulation is who's going to be the person that is authorized to send out the text? Is it going to be the person, the wholesaler, or is it going to have to be the agent? We don't have an answer to that yet. It very well could be, knowing this current makeup of the commission, they may say the only one that can market it, period, is the real estate agent. Because we fall outside the FSBO, they call it the for sale by owner exemption that's in license law, where an owner can sell their own property without listing it. The Supreme Court has said that that doesn't apply to equitable interest in a contract. So that's why it's so complicated now. I don't know what's going to happen with it. That's what I know and you know so far. Yes?
It's the real estate commission, not the legislature, that is determining these rules and forms and like the definition of marketing, is that correct?
Correct. So the legislature basically just passed the law and said it has to be, you have to be licensed to market it or use a licensed agent. And then they put it down to the regulatory body, which is the commission that writes the specific rules and regulations.
And the direction it's going currently, I realize they haven't finalized it. You're back to your example, you're the wholesaler, right? If I approach you and I say, hey, do you have anything right now? And you answer my question, is that considered marketing?
If I'm the wholesaler and you come up and say, do you have anything? If I say, yes, I do, you might get away with that, but once I start giving you any detail whatsoever under license law, that's considered marketing. Now, whether or not just saying, yes, I do, I don't know. But at the point that I say, yeah, I have it, it's 123 Main Street here, boom, toast.
You can't answer my questions if I ask you what the address is.
No, that would be considered marketing. I'm just a messenger. Please no assaulting me on the way out, man. I will tell you, initially, they were pushing for total prohibition. The problem is there are a lot of people, yes, wholesaling can be very predatory. And most of the people that are the predators there's a couple of big firms out of Chicago, one out of Jersey City and one out of Salt Lake City that were making up probably half, maybe 3/4 of all the wholesaling transaction. And they are absolutely reprehensible. It is absolutely, they are predators. The local ones, you start seeing more, they're trying to do it the right way. And then you have a fair number of people that says, like I showed you this or told you earlier, you know what? I just want to be done with this. I don't want my ex-spouse to get crap. Screw him, screw her. Take it. It's their choice, free country, kind of. Buy and hold is not wholesaling, because that means you're going to eventually close on it. No, because you are marketing to buy the property and close. One other thing the other thing it's going to choose. This is very important. If it goes into effect the way that it is now, once that property goes under contract with the real estate agent, the real estate agent is going to ask you more than likely a very crucial question. Can you close, or do you have the financial means to close? If you do not, then that's going to have to be disclosed to everybody. That is an adverse material fact under license law. So he's going to have to disclose that I'm the wholesaler and I do not have the ability to close. It's just a wholesale transaction. And in fact, the other thing is all your advertising, once it's listed with him and we start advertising it, there is a disclosure that has to be made in the advertising that says this is a wholesale transaction. And they will give you the exact verbiage you have to use in the regulation. I'm going to tell you right now, if you were to do a Freedom of Information Act request for wholesaling complaints at the commission, you'd probably have about 1,000 of them. What's happening is wholesalers, other wholesalers and real estate agents are turning them into the commission. There's the RIA in Omaha. I actually had to reach out to the gentleman that owns it because there were people that were advertising illegally on there, and I said, you need to stop, basically not allow that, because the commission has in the past got a hold of Facebook and they shut the entire group down for violating the law, allowing things that violate the law to go on that Facebook group. So he had to stop it. Oh yeah, there's so many narcs out there, they'll rat you out in a heartbeat. Just saying. The other thing that's going to happen, if they do a 100% audit, what's going to happen is they're going to start creating a list. Guarantee you. No, you're fine. That's why I'm here.
Any exceptions anticipated for, say, wholesaling commercial properties or wholesaling from an investor versus like a homeowner, that's then fine?
That's a good question, because it happens all the time between like builders and developers. They do this stuff all the time. Right now, currently in the regulation, there is no exceptions. However, that's a pretty powerful lobby. And I think given the fact that there's a lot of brokers, I mean, the commission is made up of brokers who represent developers and builders, we may start seeing some exceptions, but as it's written right now, there are none. Yeah. Man, that's a great question. So on this assignable contract addendum that the assignee and the owner has to sign, it says, wholesaler has entered into an assignable contract for the purchase of my property, and I am not entitled to any property from the sale or assignment of the assignable contract unless specifically stated in the contract. That's the portion that the owner has to sign. Now, the assignee goes a little further. It says, I do by here acknowledge that I am being offered an interest in an assignable contract or other interest in real property from a wholesaler and not the title holder of the property named in any potential contract. I understand I have a right to consult with an attorney to review or clarify any of the obligations created. That's what he has to sign. And then above it, it says that the wholesaler is making the buyer, which really should be assignee, aware that this is a for-profit transaction and that the wholesaler intends to make a profit above any stated purchase prices in any potential contract. So that's what it says. If it holds up, assuming. No numbers. However, think about this. He's the assignee, the end buyer. He's going to end up knowing. He has to know. Right? Because he's assuming the contract that we entered into. Does that make sense? So he has to be aware of all the terms and the conditions of it. Now, the owner probably won't. The owner has no reason to know what our agreement is, but he does.
Wholesalers will share purchase agreements with the price.
They have to.
That's a requirement.
That is a requirement. That's always been a requirement. If he is going to assign the terms and conditions of a contract, he has to know what he's assuming. Only makes sense. That's contract law. Right. Now I want to point this out. I want to make sure everybody is on the same page here. Him and I enter into a purchase agreement. That's a purchase agreement. I assign it to him. Whatever we agree to, he's going to assume. He can't change the terms. What you're not going to be able to do is him and I enter into a purchase contract. Then him and I enter into an additional purchase contract. You're not going to be able to do that. It's going to only be an assignment of contract. Him and I can't enter into a purchase contract because I don't have legal title. I know some of the wholesalers are doing that, and that's going to come to a crashing halt. Unless you double close, then you own it. It's already. So T2 they were a big one out of Chicago. They've already ceased all operations. The company out of Salt Lake City, is already ceased operations, and there's another one out of Chicago that I haven't heard, but I haven't seen any of their contracts. So it's actually already started. It really is, actually. I mean, all right. Yes, sir. You can. As long as they're licensed. But if you're licensed, you're either going to have to be your own broker, or you're still going to have your license with the broker. And it's still going to have to be listed with the broker. Even if you're a licensed agent doing wholesaling, it still has to be listed with your company. So the broker's going to get their cut. That's what I think will happen. If you're licensed. I mean, well, okay, let's back up. I don't know the answer to that because of the marital interest. That's going to be interesting. Your wife would have to do it, would be my guess. Title companies already are, and actually the title companies are asking for this, clarity. Some title companies said they will not do them at all, others will. So you're going to have to find a title company that will do it. All right, I know some of you are falling asleep. I had that effect on crowds. So I'm going to stick around if you guys have any questions. My wife lives in Florida now, so I have no life. So we can stay till closing if you want. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Don't forget if you want the lease, it's just paul@nebraskarealty.com. And don't forget the YouTube page for you landlords, Nebraska Landlord